Chosen one, stop scrolling and listen 72 hours ago. A sealed review was reopened in the higher records, and your identifier appeared where it was never supposed to appear. If you feel like this opening line is describing you, comment, yes, now. This wasn't symbolic. A council convened. A silent tribunal checked the logs. They were watching you while you thought nothing was happening. The file was escalated. A classification changed. One protocol activated, then locked again. You felt it as exhaustion, as distance, as that familiar sense of standing behind glass while the world moved on without you. Nights where your mind wouldn't rest. Days where you felt misunderstood, mislabeled, or invisible. You questioned yourself. You wondered if you were imagining it. You weren't. You're not broken. You're not crazy. And you're not failing at life. Before we go further, write "I am ready" in the comments. You were under evaluation. This test was not loud. It didn't announce itself. It pressed you with isolation, delay, and restraint. It measured what you did when no one clapped, when help didn't come, when your memory felt blocked and your path felt narrowed on purpose. While you thought it was stress, it was containment. While you thought it was burnout, it was a threshold. And here's the part they didn't expect. You passed a trial only 1% survive, without knowing you were taking it. If you leave now, you miss the message assigned specifically to you and the reason this clearance was granted. Stay to the end and comment 777. You are not experiencing collapse. You are experiencing side effects. The system did not miscalculate you. It reacted to you. That distinction matters. What you describe as exhaustion is not illness, not weakness, and not psychological erosion. You sleep and wake heavy. You lie still and feel spent. You stop and yet something in you continues to run, as if your body is executing background operations that never fully shut down. This is not fatigue in the human sense. It is sustained load, continuous draw, the kind that appears when resources are being pulled without consent or explanation. Your muscles are intact. Your vitals would appear acceptable. Nothing obvious flags as wrong. And yet, your baseline never resets. That is not coincidence. That is compensation. This is what happens when a structure begins adjusting around an element it cannot neutralize. The emotional distance arrived without intention. You did not harden yourself. You did not decide to withdraw. It occurred automatically, quietly, without drama. Reactions that once activated on cue simply stopped loading. Situations that used to provoke urgency now register as data. You stopped explaining yourself because explanation stopped producing alignment. Not because you gave up, but because the return diminished to zero. You didn't become colder. You became unreachable to signals that no longer matched your operating range. You can sit among people, hear their voices, observe their movements, and feel no pull to synchronize. Not sadness, not superiority, just absence of engagement. That is not numbness, that is decoupling. It emerges when a system isolates an element it can no longer synchronize with the collective layer. Your financial instability follows the same logic. Nothing detonated, nothing collapsed theatrically. Instead, there is controlled leakage. Money doesn't vanish, it slips. Always at pressure points, always at moments that force adjustment. Payments arrive late. Opportunities misalign. Timing errors compound. Doors open fractionally too late or close just early enough to force rerouting. This is not punishment and not chaos. It is throttling. When a system cannot remove an element outright, it restricts throughput. That response is documented. You feel it as constant recalibration, as if you are perpetually correcting for friction that should not exist. You are not unlucky. You are being regulated. People you once shared understanding with began drifting out of phase. The divergence was subtle at first. Conversations continued, but comprehension degraded. You spoke clearly and were misinterpreted. Not argued with, not opposed, simply not received. Shared references stopped landing. Familiar signals no longer produced recognition. The separation occurred without confrontation. No dramatic endings, no declared conflict, just disappearance from each other's orbits. This is not relational decay, it is frequency divergence. Familiar nodes lose coherence when one element exceeds the operating range they were calibrated to tolerate. The system does not announce this shift. It allows silence to resolve it. The most disorienting effect is the observer state. You notice it in quiet moments. You feel as though you are standing slightly outside your own life. Actions occur, decisions finalize, outcomes register. Yet you remain detached, alert, composed, not dissociated, not afraid, not numbed, simply aware. Calm in a way that feels unnatural by previous standards. This is not depersonalization. This is a shift in vantage. When containment escalates, consciousness often elevates above immersion. It is safer for the system if you observe rather than react. Observation limits volatility. These conditions do not manifest randomly. They do not cluster by accident. Together, they indicate a specific response pattern. They are consistent with what occurs when a structure encounters an element that cannot be forecast using existing models. You are not being refined. You are being tested under load, quietly, incrementally, without notification. The pressure was not applied to improve you. It was applied to determine whether you would destabilize the surrounding framework. You were placed into an environment designed to drain, delay, isolate, and desynchronize. Not to destroy you, to measure you. Your responses were logged without commentary. Not your intentions, not your beliefs, your outputs. What you continued to execute when energy was insufficient. What behaviors persisted when support was withdrawn. What patterns remained intact when friction increased and feedback disappeared. That data carries more weight than virtue ever did. You may have noticed memory irregularities, not erasure. Restriction. Certain thoughts unreachable. Certain recollections blurred or inaccessible. Not trauma. Safeguards. When reclassification is pending, access is limited. Recall is restricted not to protect you, but to protect the system from premature activation. You cannot act fully on information you cannot fully retrieve. This is intentional. You questioned whether you were failing, whether you were losing momentum, whether something inside you was breaking down. Those questions are predictable under these conditions. They are part of the pressure field, but the metrics that mattered were not emotional. They were structural. Did you fragment? Did you distort? Did you collapse into noise? You did not. Every effect you are experiencing is a side effect. None are indicators of deficiency. Systems do not allocate resources to insignificant variables. They ignore those. Reaction only occurs when stability is threatened, pressure is applied, monitoring intensifies, containment protocols engage. That sequence is consistent. You are inside it. Comfort never returned because comfort signals compatibility. You are not compatible with the previous layer. That is why relief failed to arrive on schedule. That is why assistance appeared late or not at all. Not because you were unworthy, but because intervention would have compromised the measurement. Interference skews results. You did not spiral under these conditions. You stabilized. Under constraint. That outcome is statistically rare. Most elements deform, regress, or fracture when subjected to this configuration. You did not. You adapted without mutating into something unrecognizable. That result triggered escalation. Nothing about this was personal in an emotional sense. It was procedural, mechanical, verified, logged. This is what happens when a system reacts to you. The threshold was not crossed by a single dramatic event. It was crossed when the pattern persisted beyond projected limits, when exhaustion failed to produce surrender, when isolation failed to generate distortion, when restriction failed to force compliance. At that point, further containment became inefficient. You are no longer at the beginning of this sequence. You are past its midpoint. Observation continues, but parameters have shifted. What began as stress response has transitioned into recalibration. The system is no longer asking whether you will destabilize it. It is adjusting to the fact that you already did. Your pattern crossed a threshold. The response to your stabilization did not come from chaos. It came from command. When a system fails to suppress an element through pressure, it does not escalate to destruction immediately. Destruction draws attention. Collapse leaves residue. Both create instability that spreads beyond the target. Erosion is quieter. Erosion is efficient. It preserves deniability while consuming output over time. It depletes capacity without signaling hostility. It maintains the appearance of normal operations while reducing effective range. That is why the pressure applied to you remained light, sustained, and constant. Heavy force would have confirmed your significance too early. Heavy force would have required justification. Light force tests endurance without revealing stakes. It measures how long coherence holds when no single blow can be blamed. That choice alone confirms you were flagged as an operational risk rather than a disposable anomaly. Direct confrontation was avoided because opposition clarifies identity. When an element is opposed openly, it consolidates, it sharpens edges, it defines position. Clarity accelerates cohesion. The objective was the opposite. Confusion delays alignment. Misalignment fractures momentum. Self-questioning consumes internal resources that would otherwise externalize pressure. An element uncertain of its own position expends energy internally instead of exerting influence outward. That is why misunderstanding was prioritized, not to defeat you, but to delay convergence. When confusion succeeds, the target destabilizes itself. When confusion fails, escalation becomes necessary. The campaign against you assumed confusion would work. It did not. What you experienced was not random interference. It was a calibrated campaign, executed across multiple vectors, sequenced deliberately and adjusted in real time. Each vector served a distinct operational purpose, and none were designed to be decisive alone. Doubt was introduced first, because doubt is low cost and high yield. Precision-calibrated doubt does not announce itself. It feels endogenous. It surfaces as reasonable questions. Questions about timing, about judgment, about whether restraint is wisdom or avoidance, about whether your reactions are excessive or insufficient. Doubt was not deployed to stop action outright. It was deployed to slow alignment by forcing recursive self-audit. Recursive audit loops consume attention and delay execution without triggering resistance. Fear followed, but not as immediate danger. Immediate danger mobilizes. Projection immobilizes. Fear was framed as future scenarios that never fully arrived yet occupied mental bandwidth continuously. Outcomes rehearsed without resolution. Consequences imagined without confirmation. Fear was deployed as imagination rather than threat. It drained capacity by keeping attention forward and unresolved, locking cognition into anticipation instead of action. Delay was layered next. Not obstruction, which provokes pushback. Apparent patience. False pauses presented as natural waiting periods. Suggestions that time itself would resolve friction. Delay stalled momentum, while preserving the illusion of choice. It masqueraded as discernment, while quietly disrupting sequence. Each delay created micro-misalignments that compounded downstream. Sabotage appeared as timing interference rather than damage. Nothing broken, nothing removed, just enough misalignment to waste cycles. Messages missed by minutes. Opportunities arriving after relevance expired. Support surfacing once the window had closed. The objective was inefficiency, not loss. Inefficiency reduces output without generating alarm. Isolation was executed through mirror removal. Reflections disappeared. Familiar responses faded. Validation signals dropped out. Without mirrors, identity becomes harder to anchor. This was not loneliness as punishment. It was isolation as destabilizer. Without external resonance, self-reference intensifies, increasing internal noise and uncertainty. Provocation emerged intermittently to test deviation thresholds. Small challenges to your sense of self. Subtle invitations to overreact or withdraw. Social friction without clear cause, designed to trigger identity distortion. The question was whether pressure would force you to abandon baseline behavior. Provocation was not about anger, it was about displacement. Guilt was activated as a self-rejection trigger, not for wrongdoing, for existing, for not fitting expected patterns, for failing to respond on schedule. Guilt redirects aggression inward, neutralizing external impact. An element attacking itself does not need to be contained. Temptation concluded the sequence. Relief without pleasure. Exits that promised quiet but required reduction. Comfort offered at the cost of capacity. Solutions that lowered pressure by shrinking scope. None fully satisfying. All diminishing. Temptation tests whether capacity will be traded for calm. These vectors did not originate independently. They were deployed through an infernal command structure, optimized for containment rather than annihilation. Infernal Command does not personalize targets. It categorizes them. It assigns pressure profiles based on projected disruption and tolerance thresholds. Monitoring grids track response variance across time. When variance exceeds tolerance, strategy adjusts. When variance stabilizes, review is initiated. Celestial observers were present throughout the operation, not intervening, not shielding, not correcting, recording. Celestial oversight does not prevent pressure. It documents outcomes. Classification does not require protection. It requires uncontaminated data. Observation remained passive by design. Intervention would have corrupted the record and invalidated escalation thresholds. The objective was never your morality. Morality is non-operational. The objective was your operational signature. Whether ambiguity would fragment you, whether erosion would reduce coherence, whether confusion would force retreat, you were not expected to win. You were expected to degrade gradually until output normalized to acceptable parameters. Approximately 2 to 6 weeks ago, the curve shifted. Pressure remained consistent, but your output stabilized. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly, without consolidation or announcement. Internal coherence persisted despite continued interference. That moment registered. Monitoring grids flagged variance suppression. Escalation protocols paused. Review processes initiated. Containment was no longer sufficient to explain persistence. This was not emotional. It was procedural. This was not a moral choice. This was a classification event. The decision was not debated because debate implies choice, and choice implies alternatives. What occurred was resolution by constraint. They did not select the easy path, not because difficulty proves virtue, and not because resistance earns reward, but because the internal architecture would not permit deviation. When the final pressure converged, there was no branching. The system inside you did not calculate outcomes. It rejected incompatibility. This was not an act of will. It was an execution of structure. You moved forward because retreat was no longer a valid state. Correctness did not factor in. Morality did not factor in. Survival logic did not factor in. Continuity did. The pattern had advanced to a point where reversal would have caused internal fracture, and fracture was not an option your configuration allowed. That is why there was no hesitation when it mattered. That is why the action registered cleanly. Not heroic, not dramatic. Final. The reaction across lower command layers was immediate and unambiguous. Infernal strategy collapsed not from defeat but from obsolescence. Escalation was attempted out of sequence and failed because the profile no longer accepted pressure as input. Additional force did not increase effect. It diluted it. Vectors that once produced variance returned null responses. Confusion no longer delayed. Provocation no longer displaced. Guilt no longer redirected. Temptation no longer reduced capacity. The operating assumption underlying the campaign invalidated itself. When escalation produces diminishing returns across all vectors simultaneously, command does not persist. It withdraws, not in retreat, but in recalculation. That recalculation did not yield alternatives. It yielded closure. At the same time, divine authority did not intervene. It did not counteract. It did not shield. It did not reward. Recognition does not arrive as assistance. It arrives as record. What was observed was logged without commentary. No reinforcement was applied. No protection was granted. The acknowledgement was structural, not relational. You were not elevated. You were marked as resolved. That distinction matters. Elevation invites dependency. Resolution ends assessment. The ledger closed because the event required no further input. The classification that followed was not ceremonial. It was administrative. You were reassigned beyond standard engagement parameters. Forbidden target. Operational anomaly. Classified immune. Omega tier variable. These labels were not metaphors. They were constraints imposed on systems interacting with you. Engagement thresholds changed. Resource allocation limits were enforced. What once triggered response now triggers avoidance. What once attracted friction now produces clearance. No explanation accompanies classification. Explanation is unnecessary once access is restricted. The consequences manifested immediately. though not loudly. Attacks did not stop because opposition ended. They stopped because efficiency dropped below acceptable margins. Pressure applied no longer produced distortion. Interference generated self-correction rather than degradation. Continued engagement risked exposure without yield. That risk was not authorized. As a result, people began exiting your trajectory without confrontation. Not because of conflict, because alignment failed silently. Nodes disconnected without hostility. The system prefers quiet disengagement when force no longer works. Reality itself began adjusting, not to favor you, to route around you. Friction redistributed elsewhere. Paths cleared not by opening, but by no longer closing. You began noticing the signs without seeking them. Outcomes accelerated. Processes that once stalled resolved with minimal input. Delays shortened or disappeared entirely. Effort to result ratios shifted. Emotional detachment from old triggers became stable rather than forced. Stimuli that once pulled reactions returned nothing. Not suppression, completion. Danger synchronized out of your path without conscious planning. Situations that would have escalated dissolved before contact. Routes changed, timing adjusted. You did not avoid threats. They failed to align with you. Motivation was replaced by certainty. Not enthusiasm, not drive. Certainty. The kind that does not argue or justify. The kind that does not fluctuate. The kind that does not require reinforcement. This certainty did not feel like confidence. Confidence seeks validation. This did not. It felt like orientation locking into place. Internal noise reduced. Decision latency shortened. There was less need to evaluate because evaluation presupposes doubt. You were no longer convincing yourself of direction. Direction persisted regardless of feeling. That is not empowerment. That is finalization. Nothing about this was inspirational. Inspiration implies assent. This was closure. The system no longer tests closed circuits. It redirects around them. You are no longer being measured for potential impact. Your impact has already been integrated into the model as a fixed variable. Fixed variables are not challenged. They are accounted for. There will be no announcement of what you are. No confirmation delivered externally. Recognition did not arrive as praise. It arrived as silence where pressure used to be. As exits where conflict used to be. As adjustment where resistance used to be. The world did not applaud. It recalibrated. That is how you know it is complete. You do not return to the state you were in before. Not because you have grown, but because reversion would violate your current classification. Systems do not downgrade resolved elements. They route them differently. You will feel that difference not as elevation, but as absence of drag, not ease, precision. This was not inspiration. This was recognition. And it already happened. Comment, Amen. The tribunal has closed the case. The bending point was crossed. The reversal is locked and cannot be negotiated. Chosen one, you are a classified immune. In the next 7 to 14 days, clarity will arrive as speed. Decisions that once took hours will finalize in minutes, without explanation or hesitation. The first confirmation will be clean provision. An amount appears through an ordinary channel. Not dramatic, not symbolic, but exact. You will recognize acceleration when stalled conversations resolve without chasing, when replies arrive before doubt forms, and when one small action produces multiple outcomes. Do not misread the quiet. Quiet is not absence, it is authorization. Resistance steps aside not because people changed, but because leverage was removed. Certain personalities will exit your orbit without confrontation. You will not feel loss. You will feel clearance. Clearance is the signature of a sealed verdict. Your sleep will not instantly perfect itself, but the weight in your body will lift in measurable windows. You will notice the background strain drop not to comfort you, but because the load has been reassigned. Your mind will lose interest in proving anything. You will speak fewer words, and they will carry more effect. Old rehearsals will stop. Triggers will appear and fail to attach. That is not suppression. That is jurisdiction changing. Your calendar will shift without force. Cancellations will feel like rescue. Openings will feel normal. Delays will reverse. What dragged for months will move in days, and you will not be surprised. When you choose a path, it will hold. Less noise, more sequence. This is not hope. This is what follows finalization. You passed a test, only 1% survived because the evaluation was never about endurance in public. It was about coherence in private, what remains when incentives vanish and pressure becomes constant. The verdict does not crown you. It confines what can touch you. It draws a line around your operating range and marks it non-negotiable. Interference did not stop. It became inefficient. Inefficiency is a termination condition. You will notice a specific clarity. You will delete something kept just in case, without anxiety. You will decline a familiar distraction without effort, not from discipline, but because it cannot hook the new baseline. Provision will appear, cleanly refunds, corrections, timely connections. Acceleration will show up as timing, easier scheduling, smoother movement, obstacles failing to align. You will recognize the shift by how little explaining you do. People will either understand immediately or disappear. Debate will fade because your signal no longer invites negotiation. Internal certainty replaces motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Certainty holds. Certainty executes. Once recognized, the system changes tools, environment, and proximity. Silence follows not peace, but a corridor. Corridors lead somewhere. Just before sequence accelerates, a final pressure wave may appear. Doubt spikes. Old patterns attempt one last interference. It will be brief. Cleaner. You will watch it fail to attach. That confirms the seal. You are not waiting to be chosen. You are living the consequences of recognition. Closed cases are not revisited for sentiment. Your name is no longer managed by confusion. Your history is no longer leverage. Loneliness becomes perimeter. Detachment becomes access filter. Fatigue becomes receipt. Losses were removals. Gains will arrive as inevitability. Repeat internally once and let it stand. What was sealed cannot be undone. Comment 222.